The Oregon Trail was first laid by fur traders beginning around 1811. In 1836, the first immigrant wagon train left Independence, Missouri, headed for the Oregon Territory, and many other immigrants would soon follow. One of those first immigrants who came to Oregon was a Presbyterian missionary named Marcus Whitman, along with his wife Narcissa. He would settle and build a mission near Walla Walla, Washington, and he would attempt to Christianize the Cayuse and Nez Perce Indians, offering them instruction in agricultural technologies, as well as weekly Bible meetings. He would eventually come into contact with another immigrant family, the Sagers, who headed west along the Oregon Trail in 1844. The eldest daughter from that family, Catherine Sager, would later write this book that we are going to read from in this episode, Across the Plains in 1844. This book was published all the way back in 1860. The story of Catherine Sager and her family has just about every element that is sometimes seen in the stories of westward expansion. Their family would suffer extensively from sickness and disease. And although the Indians who lived near the Whitman mansion professed friendship, in 1847 these Indians would turn on the settlers, leading to one of the first major Indian wars in the settlement of Western America. Here is the story of the Sager children. My father was one of the restless ones who were not content to remain in one place long at a time. Late in the fall of 1838, we immigrated from Ohio to Missouri. Our first halting place was on Green River, but the next year we took a farm in Platte County. He engaged in farming and blacksmithing, and had a wide reputation for ingenuity. Anything they needed made or mended sought his shop. In 1843, Dr. Whitman came to Missouri. The healthful climate induced my mother to favor moving to Oregon. Immigration was the theme all winter, and we decided to start for Oregon. Late in 1843, Father sold his property and moved near St. Joseph, and in April 1844 we started across the plains. The first encampments were a great pleasure to us children. We were 5 girls and 2 boys, ranging from the girl baby to be born on the way, to the oldest boy hardly old enough to be any help. We waited several days at the Missouri River. Many friends came that far to see the immigrants start on their long journey, and there was much sadness at the parting, and a sorrowful company crossed the Missouri that bright spring morning. The motion of the wagon made us all sick, and it was weeks before we got used to the seasick motion. Rain came down and required us to tie down the wagon covers, and so increased our sickness by confining the air we breathed. Our cattle recrossed in the night and went back to their winter quarters. This caused delay in recovering them and a weary forced march to rejoin the train. This was divided into companies, and we were in that commanded by William Shaw. Soon after starting, the Indians raided our camp one night and drove off a number of cattle. They were pursued but never recovered. Soon everything went smooth, and our train made steady headway. The weather was fine, and we enjoyed the journey pleasantly. There were several musical instruments among the immigrants, and these sounded clearly on the evening air, when camp was made and merry talk and laughter resounded from almost every campfire. We had 1 wagon, 2 steady yoke of old cattle, and several of young and not well broken ones. Father was no ox driver, and had trouble with these until the day he called on Captain Shaw for assistance. It was furnished by the good captain, pelting the refractory steers with stones, until they were glad to come to terms. Reaching the buffalo country, our father would get someone to drive his team, and start on the hunts, for he was enthusiastic in his love of such sports. He not only killed the great bison, but often brought home on his shoulder the timid antelope that had fallen at his unerring aim, and that are not often shot by ordinary marksmen. Soon after crossing South Platte, the unwieldy oxen ran on a bank, and overturned the wagon, greatly injuring our mother. She lay long and sensible in the tent put up for the occasion. August 1st, we nooned in a beautiful grove on the north side of the Platte. We had by this time got used to climbing in and out of the wagon when in motion. When performing this feat that afternoon, my dress got caught on an axle helve, and I was thrown under the wagon wheel, which passed over and badly crushed my limb before Father could stop the team. He picked me up and saw the extent of the injury when the injured limb hung dangling in the air. In a broken voice he exclaimed, "My dear child, your leg is broken all to pieces." The news soon spread along the train, and a halt was called. A surgeon was found and the limb set. Then we pushed on the same night to Laramie, where we arrived soon after dark. This accident confined me to the wagon the remainder of the long journey. After Laramie, we entered the Great American Desert, which was hard on the teams. Sickness became common. Father and the boys were all sick, and we were dependent for a driver on the Dutch doctor who set my leg. He offered his services and was employed, but though an excellent surgeon, he knew little about driving oxen. Some of them often had to rise from their sick beds to wade streams and get the oxen safely across. One day 4 buffalo ran between our wagon and the one behind. Though feeble, Father seized his gun and gave chase to them. This imprudent act prostrated him again, and it soon became apparent that his days were numbered. He was fully conscious of the fact, but could not be reconciled to the thought of leaving his large and helpless family in such precarious circumstances. The evening before his death, we crossed Green River and camped on the bank. Looking where I lay helpless, he said, "Poor child, what will become of you?" Captain Shaw found him weeping bitterly. He said his last hour had come, and his heart was filled with anguish for his family. His wife was ill. They had no relatives near, and a long journey lay before them. In piteous tones he begged the captain to take charge of them and see them through. This he stoutly promised. Father was buried the next day on the banks of Green River. His coffin was made of 2 troughs dug out of the body of a tree, but next year immigrants found his bleaching bones, as the Indians had disinterred the remains. We hired a young man to drive, as Mother was afraid to trust the doctor, but the kind-hearted German would not leave her, and declared his intention to see her safe in the Willamette. At Fort Bridger the stream was full of fish, and we made nets of wagon sheets to catch them. That evening the new driver told Mother he would hunt for game if she would let him use the gun. He took it, and we never saw him again. He made for the train in advance, where he had a sweetheart. We found the gun awaiting our arrival at Whitman's. Then we got along as best as we could with the doctor's help. Mother planned to get to Whitman's and winter there, but she was rapidly failing under her sorrows. The nights and mornings were very cold, and she took cold from the exposure unavoidably. With camp fever and a sore mouth, she fought bravely against fate for the sake of her children, but she was taken delirious soon after reaching Fort Bridger, and was bedfast. Traveling in this condition over a road clouded with dust, she suffered intensely. She talked of her husband, addressing him as though present, beseeching him in piteous tones to relieve her sufferings, until at last she became unconscious. Her babe was cared for by the women of the train. Those kind-hearted women would also come in at night and wash the dust from Mother's face, and otherwise make her comfortable. We traveled a rough road that day she died, and she moaned fearfully all the time. At night one of the women came in as usual, but she made no reply to questions, so she thought her asleep, and washed her face, then took her hand, and discovered the pulse was nearly gone. She lived but a few moments, and her last words were, "Oh, Henry, if you only knew how we have suffered." The tent was up, the corpse laid out, and next morning we took the last look at our mother's face. The grave was near the road. Willow brush was laid in the bottom and covered the body. The earth filled in, then the train moved on. Her name was cut on a headboard, and that was all that could be done. So in 26 days we became orphans, 7 children of us, the oldest 14 and the youngest a babe. A few days before her death, finding herself in possession of her faculties and fully aware of the coming end, she had taken an affectionate farewell of her children and charged the doctor to take care of us. She made the same request of Captain Shaw. The baby was taken by a woman in the train, and all were literally adopted by the company. No one there but was ready to do us any possible favor. This was especially true of Captain Shaw and his wife. Their kindness will ever be cherished in grateful remembrance by us all. Our new parents could not have been more solicitous or careful. When our flour gave out, they gave us bread as long as they had any, actually dividing their last loaf. To this day, Uncle Billy and Aunt Sally, as we called them, regard us with the affection of parents. Blessings on his hoary head. At Snake River they lay by to make our wagon into a cart, as our team was wearing out. Into this was loaded what was necessary. Some things were sold and some left on the plains. The last of September we arrived at Grande Ronde, where one of my sister's clothes caught fire, and she would have burned to death only that the German doctor, at the cost of burning his hands, saved her. One night the captain heard a child crying, and found my little sister had got out of the wagon, and was perishing in the freezing air, for the nights were very cold. We had long been out of flour and living on meat alone, so a few were sent in advance to get supplies from Dr. Whitman and return to us. Having so light a load, we could travel faster than the other teams, and went on with Captain Shaw and the advance. Through the Blue Mountains, cattle were giving out, and left lying in the road. We made but a few miles a day. We were in the country of Dr. Whitman's Indians, as they called themselves. They were returning from buffalo hunting and frequented our camps. They were loud in praise of the missionaries and anxious to assist us. Often they would drive up some beast that had been left behind as given out, and return it to its owner. One day when we were making a fire of wet wood, Francis thought to help the matter by holding his powder horn over a small blaze. Of course the powder horn exploded, and the wonder was he was left alive. He ran to a creek nearby and bathed his hands and face, and came back destitute of winkers and eyebrows, and his face was blackened beyond recognition. Such were the incidents and dangerous and humorous features of the journey. We reached Umatilla October 15th, and lay by while Captain Shaw went on to Whitman Station to see if the doctor would take care of us, if only until he could become located in the Williamettes. We purchased of the Indians the first potatoes we had eaten since we started on our long and sad journey. October 17th we started for our destination, leaving the baby very sick, with doubts of its recovery. Mrs. Shaw took an affectionate leave of us all, and stood looking after us long as we were in sight. Speaking of it in later years, she said she never saw a more pitiful sight than the cart full of orphans going to find a home among strangers. We reached the station in the forenoon. For weeks this place had been a subject of our talk by day, and formed our dreams at night. We expected to see log houses occupied by Indians and such people as we had seen about the forts. Instead, we saw a large white house surrounded with palisades. A short distance from the doctor's dwelling was another large adobe house, built by Mr. Gray, but now used by immigrants in the winter, and for a granary in the summer. It was situated near the mill pond, and the grist mill was not far from it. Between the two houses were the blacksmith shop and the corral, enclosed with slabs set up endways. The garden lay between the mill and the house, and a large field was on the opposite side. A good-sized ditch passed in front of the house, connecting with the mill pond, intersecting other ditches all around the farm, for the purpose of irrigating the land. We drove up and halted near this ditch. Captain Shaw was in the house, conversing with Mrs. Whitman. Glancing through the window, he saw us, and turning to her, said, "Your children have come. Will you go out and see them?" He then came out and told the boys to help the girls out and get their bonnets. Alas, it was easy to talk of bonnets, but not to find them. But one or two were finally discovered by the time Mrs. Whitman had come out. Here was a scene for an artist to describe. Foremost stood the little cart, with the tired oxen that had been unyoked lying near it. Sitting in the front end of the cart was John, weeping bitterly. On the opposite side stood Francis, his arms on the wheel, and his head resting on his arms, sobbing aloud. On the rear side, the little girls were huddled together, bareheaded and barefooted, looking at the boys and then at the house, dreading we knew not what. By the oxen stood the good German doctor, with his whip in his hand, regarding the scene with suppressed emotion. Thus Mrs. Whitman found us. She was a large, well-formed woman, fair-complexioned, with beautiful auburn hair, nose rather large, and large gray eyes. She had on a dark calico dress and gingham sunbonnets. We thought as we shyly looked at her that she was the prettiest woman we had ever seen. She spoke kindly to us as she came up, but like frightened things we ran behind the cart, peeping shyly around at her. She then addressed the boys, asking why they wept, adding, "Poor boys, no wonder you weep." She then began to arrange things as we threw them out, at the same time conversing with an Indian woman sitting on the ground nearby. A little girl about 7 years old soon came and stood regarding us with a timid look. This was little Helen Mar Meek, a half-breed. She looked very pretty to us in her green dress and white apron and neat sunbonnets. Having arranged everything in compact form, Mrs. Whitman directed the doctor and the boys where to carry them, and told Helen to show the little girls the way to the house. Seeing my lameness, she kindly took me by the hand, and my little sister by the other hand, and led us in. As we reached the steps, Captain Shaw asked if she had children of her own. Pointing to a grave at the foot of the hill not far off, she said, All the child I ever had sleeps yonder." She added that it was a great pleasure to her that she could see the grave from the door. The doctor and boys, having deposited the things as directed, went over to the mansion. As we entered the house, we saw a girl about 9 years old washing dishes. Mrs. Whitman spoke cheerfully to her and said, "Well, Mary Ann, how do you think you would like all these sisters?" Seated in her armchair, she placed the youngest on her lap, and calling us round her, asked our names, about our parents and the baby, often exclaiming as we told our artless story, "Poor children!" Dr. Whitman came in from the mill and stood in the door, looking as though surprised at the large addition so suddenly made to the family. We were a sight calculated to excite surprise, dirty and sunburned until we looked more like Indians than white children. Added to this, John had cropped our hair so that it hung in uneven locks, and added to our uncouth appearance. Seeing her husband standing there, Mrs. Whitman said with a laugh, "Come in, doctor, and see your children." He sat down and tried to take little Louisa in his arms, but she ran screaming to me, much to the discomfiture of the doctor and amusement of his wife. She then related to him what we had told her in reference to the baby, and expressed her fears lest it should die, saying it was the baby she wanted most of all. Our mother had asked that we might not be separated, so Captain Shaw now urged the doctor to take charge of us all. He feared the board might object, as he was sent a missionary to the Indians. The captain argued that a missionary's duty was to do good, and we certainly were objects worthy of missionary charity. He was finally persuaded to keep us until spring. His wife did not readily consent, but he told her he wanted boys, as well as she girls. Finding the boys willing to stay, he made a written agreement with Captain Shaw that he would take charge of them. Before Captain Shaw reached the valley, Dr. Whitman overtook him and told him that he was pleased with the children, and he need give himself no further care concerning them. The baby was brought over in a few days. It was very sick, but under Mrs. Whitman's judicious care, was soon restored to health. Our faithful friend, the German doctor, left us at last, safe in the motherly care of Mrs. Whitman. Well had he kept his promise to our dying mother. For a week or two, the house at Walla Walla was full of company. Having no help, Mrs. Whitman was too much engaged in household affairs to pay any attention to us. Very lonely did that large house seem to me during that time. Being a cripple, I was not able to join the other children in their pastimes, and they were too busy enjoying themselves to attend to me. Seated by the cradle, I plied my needle at simple sewing. I saw my brothers only at mealtime. Mrs. Whitman came occasionally to bring the baby her milk. I thought I could never be happy where everything was so strange, and shed many tears in solitude. I became so timid as to cry if addressed by the doctor or anyone. School commenced soon after our arrival, and most of the children attended. In course of time, the company left the house. Help was hired to do the housework, and Mrs. Whitman, having more time to herself, paid more to us. Gathering us around her in the evening, she amused us with anecdotes, distributing pieces of calico or cloth, and showing us how to make patchwork and rag dolls, conversing with us in a kind and familiar way. On one of these occasions, she gave each of us a string of beads to wear, with the understanding that anyone who had to be reproved for doing wrong must return the beads to her. We had been long without restraint, so that we had become quite unruly and difficult to manage. They were strict disciplinarians and held the reins with steady hands. Any deviation from the rules met with instant and severe chastisement. Every effort to merit their approval was rewarded with smiles. While we were held under strict subjection, every effort was made to render us comfortable and happy, and to win our love and confidence. Mrs. Whitman was particularly adapted to raising children, having the art of uniting instruction and pleasure. She was a fine singer. I have never known anyone who excelled her in this respect. She soon commenced teaching us vocal music. Refined and accomplished herself, she exercised over our rude natures that influence that refines and beautifies a home. We soon formed a warm attachment for her, and fell into the practice of calling her and Dr. Whitman mother and father, as the other children did, and continued it while they lived. They were careful to have us remember our parents, and would speak of them with affection and respect. When necessary to administer punishment, she would set our faults before us, and her own responsibility, and show that all was done for our own good, and would ask what we thought our parents would wish her to do. Dr. Whitman's family before we came consisted of himself and wife, Narcissa P. Whitman, his nephew who came out with him in 1843 when 14 years old, Mary Ann Bridger, 9 years old, Helen Mar Meek, 7 years old, who had been raised from infancy by Mrs. Whitman, and David M. Cortez, 7 years old. This boy's father was a Spaniard, his mother a Walla Walla Indian. Becoming tired of the infant, she cast him into a hole to perish. His grandmother rescued him and took him to Mrs. Whitman, naked except a small piece of skin tied over his shoulders. We were in the schoolroom from Monday morning until Saturday noon. The afternoon was a holiday. If the weather was pleasant, the preparations for the Sabbath lacing completed, Mrs. Whitman took us out for a ramble over the hills. In inclement weather, we were provided amusement in the house. The doctor believed in young folks having plenty of exercise. The Sabbath was always strictly observed, yet made so pleasant that we hailed its dawn with delight. Every preparation was made the day before, and perfect stillness pervaded the house Sabbath morning. In the winter season, a Bible class met on Saturday night. All the family attended, and no effort was spared to make it interesting. A subject was given us to prove from the Bible, and Mrs. Whitman saw that each child had a proof to bring in. They were commented on, a chapter was read, each one reading a verse and giving their thoughts on it. These exercises closed by singing some Bible hymn. Sabbath morning we were reminded of the day, and all kept still. Each sat with a book, and those too small to read were handed pictures. After breakfast we prepared for Sunday school, that met at 11 o'clock, while the doctor held his service with the natives. Each got 7 verses, one being learned every morning during the week. This was an interesting hour spent together, especially when the doctor would spend some moments with us. At 3 p.m. we met for the regular afternoon service, when Dr. Whitman read a sermon. He was not a preacher but a physician. We had to find the text after the service was over and repeat it to him. The evening was spent in reading, reciting the commandments, etc. One evening in the week, Mrs. Whitman would collect the young around her, holding a prayer meeting with them and conversing on religious subjects. The first Monday night in each month, a meeting was held in behalf of missions, and Monday after New Year's was observed as a fast day. The housework was hired done in winter, so the children could follow their studies without hindrance. Mrs. Whitman and the girls did the work in the summer. Each of us had her allotted task, and was expected promptly to do her duty. At 11 we bathed in the river. Dinner was served at 12. When the work was done, we all sat in a large room at our sewing, save one of us who read aloud to the rest. Supper was at 5 o'clock, and after that was over, time until retiring for the night was devoted to recreation. In the spring, the evenings were spent in the garden putting in seeds. Otherwise, we did as we pleased. Sometimes the boys would bring horses for us to ride. At times, we would go with the doctor to visit the lodges, where Indians were sick. Mrs. Whitman was always with us in all these occupations, adding to our enjoyment. She was very fond of flowers, and we assisted in taking care of her flower garden each season. Our time flowed on in one uninterrupted stream of pleasure. We were constantly kept gaining knowledge, and from morning until night our adopted parents labored to promote our happiness. The family was larger in the winter. From 20 to 25, including children, sat around the table at meals. Besides the adopted children, there were others who came to attend the mission school. Summers the doctor was gone most of the time, so there was only Mrs. Whitman and the children. Mr. Spaulding's daughter attended school with us. She came on horseback in charge of an Indian woman, 120 miles. The manner of living was simple. In winter we had beef, and in summer mutton and fish. Pork seldom came on the table. Dr. Whitman ignored fine flour, and wheat flour and cornmeal were used unbolted. Tea and coffee came to the table only on rare occasions. This was a matter of economy, as delicacies were not easy to get in the country at that time. There was an abundance of wild fruit to be purchased of the natives. A good garden supplied plenty of vegetables. Cake and pastry only were seen on holidays. Milk, butter, and cheese were in full supply. And thus you have our mode of living at Waialapu. Some may ask how the washing for so large a family was managed. As early as 4 o'clock, all hands were mustered for work in the kitchen, Mrs. Whitman at the head. Tubs and barrels were put in use, and all the implements needed were at hand. The boys, with long aprons tied around them, brought the water and did the pounding, while the women rubbed the clothes. Jokes were current, and all were in good humor. By school time at 9 o'clock, the clothes were on the line. It fell to the lot of myself and brother to get breakfast on wash days. Owing to the location and the evaporation in the spring of alkali ponds nearby, Waialapu was not healthy. The mill pond was nearby, and we were more or less troubled with chills and fever in warm weather. I was very subject to it, and suffered every summer of my stay there, being often unable to labor. As the eldest daughter, I had supervision of the other girls, and from being confined to the house so much, I became a constant companion of Mrs. Whitman. An attachment near to that of mother and daughter existed between us, from this constant association. To me she told all her plans for the pleasure or improvement of the children, as well as her fears and troubles concerning them. When the doctor was long absent, I sat with her and read or conversed, and was her bedfellow. She often said she could not get along without me. The spring after we arrived, Brother Francis resolved to run away to the lower country, with those who had wintered there. His reason was he disliked the strict discipline maintained. The doctor was away, and when Francis started to go, Mrs. Whitman urged him pleasantly to stay, but he went on the run, mounted his horse, and was off before the wagons moved which he was to accompany. She had not succeeded in winning the boy's confidence and affection, and Francis was stubborn. Efforts were made to overtake him and to get him back, but they were unavailing. He went to the Williamette and remained there. On his return, Dr. Whitman talked with John and found he was willing to remain. He then made a proposal to aid the boys to get a start in cattle and horses, so that they would be acquiring property. This was made known to Francis by a letter, and a horse sent for him, so that in the fall we had the pleasure of again becoming a united family. In the spring of 1845, the Cayuses were embroiled in a war with the Snakes. A Cayuse family named Prince was going to the buffalo country to hunt, and on the way camped on a small stream in the Snake region, opposite a camp of Snake Indians. One morning, Prince with his servant rode over to see the other camp. His horse stood all day tied at the Snake Lodge, but the mother did not go to learn about him because her daughter said it would be foolish. Toward night, the horse disappeared, and during the night the Snake camp also disappeared. Going over there, the mother and daughter found the dead bodies of servant and master. War resulted, in which many Cayuses lost their lives, including some of their chiefs. We saw them come home from their war raids, and heard and saw them singing war songs, dancing war dances, and then they would change to a funeral dirge for their dead warriors. After a successful raid, they would spend days in celebrating their victory, and reciting the prowess of their own warriors. The beating of drums and their war whoops and songs filled the air with savage sounds. The monotonous tones of the Indian flutes mellowed the horrors of the den a little. One Sunday morning in the autumn of 1845, two men arrived at the station. One of them, Andrew Rogers, was a young man of about 25, tall and slender, sandy hair, and a sallow look that betokened ill health. He sang hymns and played the violin, so the seceders to which church he belonged turned him out. His gentlemanly appearance and intelligence won the admiration of Dr. and Mrs. Whitman. He came to procure room and care for a friend who was ill with consumption. He succeeded in this, and was also engaged to teach school the ensuing winter. Going to Umatilla, he soon returned with his friend, Joseph Finley, who took board with the family of Mr. Osborne, his relative. He had made the journey to Oregon hoping for improved health. For a while he improved, and seemed stronger. Dr. and Mrs. Whitman became much attached to him. He was one day taken worse when at their house, and never left it. They made him comfortable and attended to him as if he were a son or brother. He died very happy, bidding all goodbye and thanking his friends for all their care of him. All gathered around the deathbed, and the scene was very impressive as he gave his last farewell to all around him. About this time, the station had a visit from a band of Delaware Indians, under the leadership of Tom Hill, who was very intelligent and could speak English as well as Cayuse. Dr. Whitman made a feast for them and invited the leading Cayuses and others. The indispensable item of an Indian feast was corn mush. A large kettle was suspended over a fire in the yard, and the mush was made by putting in tallow and stirring in meal or flour. When cooked, the kettle was taken indoors and placed on the floor. The doctor was master of ceremonies, and the rest came in order of rank. The doctor and the chiefs dipped their spoons in the big kettle, but common people had dishes served and ate out of them. Some acted as waiters. They had tea sweetened. We children were looking on, and it amused us to see what a quantity of sugar they used, all that the tea could hold. It was evening, and the family occupied a bench on one side of the big room, which was crowded. It was well lighted with candles, and they ate in silence, except the sipping noise peculiar to Indians eating. Their performances at the trencher were so amusing to us that occasionally Mrs. Whitman had to send us outdoors. When the feast was over, the room was cleared and put in order for the speech. Tom Hill delivered an address that lasted 2 hours, and was quite eloquent. We could understand the Cayuse talk, but the Indians did not know it. We were not allowed to learn it, and kept as much as possible away from the Indians, but constantly hearing the language spoken, we could not help but learn the meaning of it, though we could not speak it well. After the massacre, they soon found out that we could understand their talk. Mrs. Whitman always treated them politely and kindly, thanking them for every little favor they did her. The next spring, Mr. Rogers was away much of the time at the Spokane Mission, conducted by Messrs. Walker and Eels. Dr. Whitman was absent at the sawmill or breaking up land for the Indians and putting in their crops. Mrs. Whitman and the girls spent the time at home, and found enough to employ them to prevent feeling lonesome. We studied botany with her and rambled over the country in search of flowers and plants. A bad man was named Tamahas, meaning murderer, as he had once killed a man. One day the doctor was at work in his field when this man rode up and ordered him, peremptorily, to go and grind a grist for him. When the doctor objected to his talking and acting so, he said he could grind it for himself, and started for the mill. The doctor could walk across sooner, and did so. Tamahas came at him there with a club, but saw an iron bar in his hand. They had a serious time of it, both with words and blows. But the iron bar was a full match for the club, and Tamahas finally agreed to behave himself and have his grist ground. Exhausted in body and mind, the doctor came to the house and threw himself down, saying that if they would only say so, he would gladly leave, for he was tired almost beyond endurance. It is hardly possible to conceive of a greater change than Dr. Whitman had worked in the life of the Cayuses. They now had growing fields, could have good homes, a mill to grind their meal, and they were taught things of the greatest use. Yet some of them could not realize that he was unselfish in all this. The following winter was very cold, the coldest ever known in the country, and the Indians charged the whites with bringing the cold weather upon them. Old Jimmy, a Catholic Indian, claimed the power of working miracles, and said he brought the cold upon them to punish them for their unbelief and wickedness. They paid him liberally to bring about a change, and finally a thaw did come, and he claimed all the merit of it. The doctor made his fall visit to the valley, bringing back something for each one of us. He always remembered the children when he went to the valley, and brought us all some token of his love. He piloted the emigrants by a nearer and better route to the Dalles, and learned with apprehension that the last of the train were afflicted with measles and whooping cough. He knew that they would spread through the native camps, and feared the consequences. None of his own family had had the measles, and but few of the others. This fall, Brother John had his horse saddled to return to the Dalles to reside, but at Mr. Whitman's earnest request he consented to remain. Had he gone there, he might now be living. Laying aside his gun, he now devoted himself to his studies. He rose early at 4 o'clock, and wrote, but I never knew what he wrote about, as the papers were all destroyed after the massacre. The measles were among the natives, and in the doctor's absence, Mrs. Whitman was their physician. All arrangements were made for the winter, teachers were employed, and all things were in order. The emigration had brought a Canadian half-breed named Joe Louis, who was so disagreeable that they refused to let him travel further in their company. Dr. Whitman reluctantly gave him some work. He tried to send him below with the company, but in a few days he was back again, so the doctor reluctantly engaged him for the winter. He was destitute of clothes and was supplied. We all disliked him, but he was well used and kindly treated. Yet this wretch laid the careful plans and told the terrible lies that led to the massacre, and took an active part in murder and robbery. In the fall of 1847, the emigration over the mountains brought the measles. It spread among the Indians, and owing to their manner of living, it proved very fatal. It was customary for immigrant families who arrived late to winter at the station, and some 7 or 8 families had put up there to spend the winter of 1847. Among the arrivals was a half-breed named Joe Louis, who had joined the immigration at Fort Hall. Much against his will, the doctor admitted this person into his family for the winter. We none of us liked him. He seemed surly and morose. There was also a Frenchman named Joseph Stanfield, who had been in the doctor's employ since the year 1845. Up to the year 1847, the Protestant missions had been the only religious influence among the Indians. In the fall of this year, the Catholic Church established missions among them, and the teachings of the two clashed. The Indian mind is so constructed that he cannot reconcile the different isms. Consequently, they became much worked up on the subject. Many long talks occurred between them and Dr. Whitman in reference to the two religious systems. Owing to the sickness and these other causes, the natives began to show an insolent and hostile feeling. It was now late in the season, and the weather was very inclement. Whitman's large family were all sick, and the disease was raging fearfully among the Indians, who were rapidly dying. I saw from 5 to 6 buried daily. The field was open for creating mischief, and the two Joes improved it. Joe Louis was the chief agent. His cupidity had been awakened, and he and his associate expected to reap a large spoil. A few days previous to the massacre, Mr. Spaulding arrived at the station, accompanied by his daughter, 10 years old. She was the second child born of white parents west of the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Whitman's child being the first. She had lived her 10 years of life among the natives, and spoke the language fluently. Saturday, after his arrival, Mr. Spaulding accompanied Dr. Whitman to the Umatilla to visit the Indians there, and hold a meeting for worship with them upon the Sabbath. They rode nearly all night in a heavy rain. Dr. Whitman spent the next day visiting the sick, and returned to the lodge where Mr. Spaulding was staying, late in the afternoon, nearly worn out with fatigue. The condition of his family made it imperative that he should return home, so arrangements were made for Mr. Spaulding to remain a few days on the Umatilla, to visit among and preach to the Indians. As Dr. Whitman was mounting his horse to leave, Stickus, a friendly Christian Indian, who was the owner of the lodge, came out and told him that Joe Louis was making trouble, that he was telling his, Stickus, people, that the doctor and Mr. Spaulding were poisoning the Indians so as to give their country to his own people. He said, "I do not believe him, but some do, and I fear they will do you harm. You had better go away for a while until my people have better hearts." Dr. Whitman arrived home at about 10 o'clock that night, having ridden 25 miles after sundown. He sent my 2 brothers who were sitting up with the sick to bed, saying that he would watch the remainder of the night. After he had retired, he examined the patients one after the other. I also was lying sick at this time. Coming to Helen, he spoke and told his wife, who was lying on the bed, that Helen was dying. He sat and watched her for some time, when she rallied and seemed better. I had noticed that he seemed to be troubled when he first came home, but concluded that it was anxiety in reference to the sick children. Taking a chair, he sat down by the stove and requested his wife to arise, as he wished to talk with her. She complied, and he related to her what Stickus had told him that day, also that he had learned that the Indians were holding councils every night. After conversing for some time, his wife retired to another room, and the doctor kept his lonely watch. Observing that I was restless, he surmised that I had overheard the conversation. By kind and soothing words he allayed my fears, and I went to sleep. I can see it all now and remember just how he looked. The fatal 29th of November dawned, a cold, foggy morning. It would seem as though the sun was afraid to look upon the bloody deed the day was to bring forth, and that nature was weeping over the wickedness of man. Dr. Whitman's brow was serene, with no trace of the storm that had raged in his breast during the night. He was somewhat more serious than usual. Most of the children were better, only 3 being dangerous. 2 of these afterwards died. We saw nothing of Mother, Mrs. Whitman. One of the girls put some breakfast on a plate and carried it to her. She was sitting with her face buried in her handkerchief, sobbing bitterly. Taking the food, she motioned the child to leave. The food was there, untouched, next morning. An Indian child had died during the night, and was to be brought to the station for burial. While awaiting the coming of the corpse, Dr. Whitman sat reading and conversing with his assistant, Mr. Rogers, upon the difficulties that seemed to surround him, the discontent of the Indians, the Catholics forcing themselves upon them, and the insinuations of Joe Louis. He made plans for conciliating the natives and for improving their condition. He said that the bishop was coming to see him in a few days, and he thought that then he could get the Indians to give him leave to go away in the spring, adding, "If things do not clear up by that time, I will move my family below." Being informed of the arrival of the corpse, he arose, and after calling his wife and giving her directions in regard to the sick children, he wended his way to the graveyard. A beef had to be killed for the use of the station, and my brother Francis, accompanied by Joe Stanfield, had gone early to the range and driven it in. And 3 or 4 men were dressing it near the grist mill, which was running, grinding grist for the Indians. Upon the return from the funeral, the doctor remarked that none but the relatives were at the burying, although large numbers were assembled nearby, but it might be owing to the beef being killed, as it was their custom to gather at such times. His wife requested him to go upstairs and see Mrs. Bewley, who was quite sick. He complied, returning shortly with a troubled look on his countenance. He crossed the room to a sash door that fronted the mill, and stood for some moments drumming upon the glass with his fingers. Turning around, he said, "Poor Lorinda is in trouble, and does not know the cause. I found her weeping, and she said there was a presentiment of evil on her mind, that she could not overcome. I will get her some medicine, and wife, you take it up to her, and try and comfort her a little, for I have failed in the attempt." As he said this, he walked to the medicine case and was making a selection. His wife had gone to the pantry for milk for one of the children. The kitchen was full of Indians, and their boisterous manner alarmed her. She fled to the sitting room, bolting the door in the face of the Indians who tried to pass in. She had not taken her hand from the lock when the Indians rapped and asked for the doctor. Dr. Whitman told his wife to bolt the door after him. She did so. Listening for a moment, she seemed to be reassured, crossed the room, and took up the youngest child. She sat down with this child in her arms. Just then Mrs. Osborne came in from an adjoining room and sat down. This was the first time this lady had been out of her room for weeks, having been very ill. She had scarcely sat down when we were all startled by an explosion that seemed to shake the house. The 2 women sprang to their feet and stood with white faces and distended eyes. The children rushed outdoors, some of them without clothes, as we were taking a bath. Placing the child on the bed, Mrs. Whitman called us back and started for the kitchen. But changing her mind, she fastened the door and told Mrs. Osborne to go to her room and lock the door, at the same time telling us to put on our clothes. All this happened much quicker than I can write it. Mrs. Whitman then began to walk the floor, wringing her hands, saying, "Oh, the Indians, they have killed my husband, and I am a widow." She repeated this many times. At this moment, Mary Ann, who was in the kitchen, rushed around the house and came in at a door that was not locked. Her face was deathly white. We gathered around her and inquired if father was dead. She replied yes. Just then a man from the beef came in at the same door, with his arm broken. He said, "Mrs. Whitman, the Indians are killing us all." This roused her to action. The wounded man was lying upon the floor calling for water. She brought him a pitcherful from another room, locked all the doors, then, unlocking that door, she went into the kitchen. As she did so, several immigrant women with their small children rushed in. Mrs. Whitman was trying to drag her husband in. One of the women went to her aid, and they brought him in. He was fatally wounded but conscious. The blood was streaming from a gunshot wound in the throat. Kneeling over him, she implored him to speak to her. To all her questions he whispered, yes or no, as the case might be. Mrs. Whitman would often step to the sash door and look out through the window to see what was going on out of doors, as the roar of guns showed us that the bloodthirsty fiends were not yet satisfied. At such times she would exclaim, "Oh, that Joe Louis is doing it all!" Several times this wretch came to the door and tried to get into the room where we were. When Mrs. Whitman would ask, "What do you want, Joe?" he would run away. Looking out, we saw Mr. Rogers running toward the house, hotly pursued by Indians. He sprang against the door, breaking out 2 panes of glass. Mrs. Whitman opened the door and let him in, and closed it in the face of his pursuers, who, with a yell, turned to seek other victims. Mr. Rogers was shot through the wrist and tomahawked on the head. Seeing the doctor lying upon the floor, he asked if he was dead, to which the doctor replied, "No." The school teacher, hearing the report of the guns in the kitchen, ran down to see what had happened. Finding the door fastened, he stood for a moment, when Mrs. Whitman saw him and motioned for him to go back. He did so and had reached the stairs leading to the schoolroom when he was seized by an Indian who had a large butcher knife. Mr. Sanders struggled and was about to get away when another burly Indian came to the aid of the first. Standing by Mrs. Whitman's side, I watched the horrid strife until, sickened, I turned away. Just then a bullet came through the window, piercing Mrs. Whitman's shoulder. Clasping her hands to the wound, she shrieked with pain, and then fell to the floor. I ran to her and tried to raise her up. She said, "Child, you cannot help me. Save yourself." We all crowded around her and began to weep. She commenced praying for us. "Lord, save these little ones." She repeated this over many times. She also prayed for her parents, saying, "This will kill my poor mother." The women now began to go upstairs, and Mr. Rogers pushed us to the stairway. I was filled with agony at the idea of leaving the sick children and refused to go. Mr. Rogers was too excited to speak, so taking up one of the children, he handed her to me and motioned for me to take her up. I passed her to someone else, turned and took another, and then the third, and ran up myself. Mr. Rogers then helped Mother to her feet and brought her upstairs and laid her on the bed. He then knelt in prayer, and while thus engaged, the crashing of doors informed us that the work of death was accomplished out of doors, and our time had come. The wounded man, whose name was Kimball, said that if we had a gun to hold over the banisters it might keep them away. There happened to be an old broken gun in the room, and this was placed over the railing. By this time they were smashing the door leading to the stairway. Having accomplished this, they retired. All was quiet for a while when we heard footsteps in the room below, and a voice at the bottom of the stairway called Mr. Rogers. It was an Indian who represented that he had just come. He would save them if they would come down. After a good deal of parleying, he came up. I told Mother that I had seen him killing the teacher, but she thought I was mistaken. He said that they were going to burn the house and that we must leave it. I wrapped my little sister up and handed her to him, with the request that he would carry her. He said that they would take Mrs. Whitman away, and then come back for us. Then all left save the children and Mr. Kimball. When they reached the room below, Mother was laid upon a settee and carried out into the yard by Mr. Rogers and Joe Lewis. Having reached the yard, Joe dropped his end of the settee, and a volley of bullets laid Mr. Rogers, Mother, and Brother Francis, bleeding and dying on the ground. While the Indians were holding a council to decide how to get Mrs. W. and Mr. Rogers into their hands, Joe Lewis had been sent to the schoolroom to get the school children. They had hid in the attic but were ferreted out and brought to the kitchen, where they were placed in a row to be shot. But the chief relented, and said they should not be hurt. But my brother Francis was killed soon after. My oldest brother was shot at the same time the doctor was. Night had now come, and the chief made a speech in favor of sparing the women and children, which was done, and they all became prisoners. 10 ghastly, bleeding corpses lay in and around the house. Mr. Osborne's family had secreted themselves under the floor, and escaped during the night, and after great hardships reached Fort Walla Walla. One other man escaped to this fort, but was never heard of again. Another fled to Mr. Spaulding's station. Mr. Kimball was killed the next day. Mr. Spaulding remained at Umatilla until Wednesday, and was within a few miles of the doctor's station when he learned the dreadful news. He fled, and after great suffering reached his station, which had been saved by the presence of mind and shrewdness of his wife. Mr. Canfield was wounded, but concealing himself until night, he fled to Mr. Spaulding's station. The manner of the attack on Dr. Whitman I learned afterward from the Indians. Upon entering the kitchen, he took his usual seat upon a settee, which was between the wall and the cook stove. An Indian began to talk to him in reference to a patient the doctor was attending. While thus engaged, an Indian struck him from behind on the head with a tomahawk. At the same moment, 2 guns were discharged, one at the doctor and the other at Brother John, who was engaged in winding twine for the purpose of making brooms. The men at the beef were set upon. Mr. Kimball had his arm broken by a bullet, and fled to the doctor's house. Mr. Hoffman fought bravely with an axe. He split the foot of the Indian who first struck the doctor, but was overpowered. Mr. Canfield was shot, the bullet entering his side, but he made his escape. The miller fell at his post. Mr. Hall was laying the upper floor in a building. Leaping to the ground, he wrested a gun from an Indian, and fled to the fort. He was never seen or heard of afterwards, and it is surmised that he was murdered there. The tailor was sitting upon his table sewing. An Indian stepped in, shot him with a pistol, and then went out. He died at midnight after great suffering. Night came and put an end to the carnival of blood. The November moon looked down bright and cold upon the scene, nor heeded the groans of the dying who gave forth their plaints to the chill night air. Mr. Osborne's family were concealed where they could hear Mr. Rogers' words, as he prayed to that Savior whom he had loved and served for many years. His last words were, "Come, Lord Jesus, come quickly." The clock told the midnight hour ere death came to the relief of these victims of savage brutality. The dead bodies lay where they fell from Monday night until Wednesday, when the Christian Indians, among whom the doctor and his wife had labored for 11 years, and from whom the natives had received nothing but kindness, gave consent to have them buried, but not one of them would help in the task. Joe Stanfield was set at the work. A grave 3 feet deep and wide enough to receive the 11 victims was dug, and the bodies placed in it. Wolves excavated the grave and devoured the remains. The volunteers who went up to fight the Indians gathered up the bones, placed them in a wagon box, and again buried them. And this is all the burial these martyrs of Americanism in Oregon have ever received. So that's it for this episode. This covered 3 of the 4 chapters in this book, Across the Plains in 1844, by Catherine Sager. In the next episode on this channel, we will read the 4th and final chapter, which discusses what became of the captive women and children after the massacre on the Whitman mission. Unfortunately for many of the captives, their captivity probably felt like a fate worse than death. The poor Sager children were made orphans twice within a period of 3 years, and the 2 boys were killed in the massacre. Their mother, Naomi Carney Sager, gave birth to her last child, Henrietta Sager, on May 22, 1844. It was a few months later, on August 28, 1844, when their father, Henry Sager, died of camp fever, and their mother, Naomi Carney Sager, died about a month later, on September 25th. We will hear more about what happened to the Sager children in the next episode on this channel. Let us know what you think about this story in the comments. This channel is called Unworthy History because we cover actual history that has sadly been deemed unworthy of airtime by so-called history channels on TV. So here on this channel, our mission is to present actual history directly from old books. If you'd like to support our mission, then you can become a Patreon or YouTube channel member. Members will have full access to all of our members-only videos, and your contribution will be recognized at the end of each episode. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.